Welcome all third-year students from English department and translation department to our first lecture of second semester. As I have already informed you that our play for the second semester will be She Stoops to Conquer by Oliver Goldsmith, and it is a comedy, not a tragedy as Julius Caesar. So, in order to start with the play, we have to understand how many types of comedy we have, and we must go over those types so that to understand what type of comedy is She Stoops to Conquer. So, here is the definition of comedy, and then we will go over through the kinds of comedy that we have, and then there is a slight difference. We'll go by the end to the slight differences between tragedy and comedy. So let's start with the definition of comedy. So there are several types of dramatic comedy. We have romantic comedy, and we have satiric comedy, and we have the comedy of manners, which is the most important things because She Stoops to Conquer is all about the comedy of manners. So these comedies are considered to be the main traditional ones, and we cannot really appreciate the differences between them unless we have some idea of how much all comedies have in common. So these, comedies, the three types, do not differ from each another a lot. There's something in common between all of them. So, what is a comedy? So, comedy consists of laughing at people caught in difficult situations, which we will usually be resolved by the end of the play. So that there is a difficult situation by the beginning of the play, and by the end of the play, this situation is usually resolved. So traditional comedy ends with a marriage or a dance, which means a happy ending, unlike a tragedy, which ends with death usually, which is a sad ending. So the disorder that threatened the social concord having been overcome will be overcome by the end of the play. And on the heart of comedy, which means in the middle of comedy, however, lies something more disturbing, for it is a way of looking at the world that regards the whole of social life as an elaborate charade, which is constantly disrupted by people's folly. So people committed a folly, okay, and this is all about what we call it a comedy. So comedy often shows us how people irrational impulses such as love, greed, or their absurd self-importance undermine any claims of society to be rational, civilized order. So the main important thing is that the aim of comic dramatists is not to correct the behavior. Try to pay attention to that. It's not his, let's say, main cause of writing comedy. For he or she, the characters, are aware of their irredeemable folly because by the end of the play will be resolved. Okay, this folly will be resolved. So the comic dramatist, his main, let's say, aim is not to correct the behavior for them. Okay, so this could be a gloomy vision, but it emerges as funny because of the detached stance of the comic writer. So people are seen as types acting out familiar roles. So the action is meant to strike us not as real but as illustrative of human weakness, with everything being exaggerated. So this folly can be something simple, but in the play can be exaggerated to achieve what we can call a comedy. This is an alternative perspective to that of a tragedy, informed not by a sense of how complex the problems are that face people, but by a sense of how ridiculously serious people are about themselves. So, if you students remember the beginning of the play of Julius Caesar and the end of the play, there was a serious problem, and there was a complex problem that faced people. right? But in comedy, there is a sense of what we can call it ridiculously, very ridiculous and very, people commit it fully. Okay, so there is here a slight difference between tragedy and comedy. Now we come to the types of comedy that we have. So we already stated by the beginning or the definition of comedy, we have romantic comedy. So this is first. So what is a romantic comedy? So usually deals with how seriously young people take love and how foolishly love makes them behave. Okay, so from its name, romantic, which includes romance, right? And this is, let's say, this is most evident in Shakespeare works. So Shakespeare's comedy is also all about romantic comedy, and it's more evident in his play Midsummer Night's Dream. So it is a gentle form of comedy, but in Shakespeare Merchant of Venice, it can be disturbing. So there is a darker version of romantic comedy, and this darker version in which disaster and death it threatens the character, and we will not go over the darker version right now. So the romantic comedy is most often associated with Shakespeare, and students, since it is romantic, so it is mostly used in movies, and a lot of movies also follow this genre of romantic comedies. So the let's say the plot in romantic comedies involves a love affair between a beautiful lady and a boy, and by the end there is a happy ending. Okay, so this is very important. Romantic, which means romance, so there is a love story and there is a happy ending as well. So we have to know that his contemporary, which means Shakespearean contemporary, Ben Jonson, students of English department, you might be well familiar with this name. Ben Jonson, on the other hand, he is most often associated with satiric comedy. And let us understand what is a satiric comedy and how can we differentiate it from romantic comedy. So let's start with satiric comedy. So satiric comedy might appear to be more constructive than other forms of comedy in that it claims to laugh people out of folly through caricature. Okay, so since it is a satiric comedy, which means there is a satire, right? So satiric comedy also intended to satirize the social and political aspect of institutions. Okay, and this type of comedy, its main let's say goal is to correct its main mission is to correct the social behaviors. So characters are presented as either grotesquely ludicrous, as in Volpone, where they are bestial versions of human beings, or as eccentric and unbalanced as in Everyman in his humor. So in his plays, Ben Jonson depicts a crazy world where moral values are overturned by roguery, self-deception, and obsessive greed. So the intention may be moral, but we are usually left with the impression that people are too corrupt and foolish ever to reform. Okay, so this is the difference between satiric comedy and romantic comedy. So the comedy of manners in English literature, the comedy of manner became popular in the Restoration period. And in fact, the term Restoration comedy is sometimes associated or sometimes used as a synonym for comedy of manner. So comedy of manners or what Restoration comedy, both of those two names refer to one thing. If I said Restoration comedy, it means comedy of manners. Okay, so this comedy is arising from the gap between the characters' attempt to preserve the standards of a polite behavior and their actual behavior. As so often the case in comedy. We see the absurdity of people, but here the focus is very directly on their morals and manners. Okay, manners in society. So that's why it is called the comedy of manners. Okay, so the playwright here tries to ridicule the social manners of a certain section of, let's say, a society. So students, there is a difference between romantic comedy, in which there is a love story because we say there is a romance, and satiric comedy, there is a satire in which it satirizes the, certain institution, or let's say certain section of a society. And we have here the comedy of manners, in which they focus on the manner of people and their morals in society. Okay, so we see that the tradition of comedy of manners continues, for example, in the works of Oscar Wilde, but a significant change does seem to take place in stage comedy in the late 19th century. So this type of comedy always suggests the fragile of the society order, but earlier dramatists know that they are exaggerating. They are really fairly confident that the society is in reasonably good health. Okay, so the main important thing here is the focus is on the characters trying to maintain a certain role as their secure word crumples. Okay, so the characters in comedy of manners have a little depth, since playwrights often use stereotypical stock characters. So students in comedy of manners, usually the dramatist or the playwright, use stock characters. Who are the stock characters? Those characters that represent a section of a society, which means either they're a schemer or hypocrite or a fool character or a jealous husband or interfering old parents. Or you will understand this when we'll go through She Stoops to Conquer. There is a stock characters that represent someone or a section of the society. Okay, so this is a very, very, let's say, famous in the comedy of manners. Okay, so let's see here. We have lust, we have greed, we have materialistic nature of people, gossip and rumors, hypocritical nature, and false pretensions of the people were common subject of the comedy of manners. Okay, so the comedy of manners, when a playwright want to write a comedy of manners about something, so the topics might be either lust or greed or any other, gossiping things, rumors, or anything, okay, or any false pretensions of humans. Okay, so these are the common subjects of comedy of manners. So guys, if you see here, there is no love story, right? There is materialistic nature of things. There is no love story between two people, and the writer here is not satirizing let's say someone or a section of a society. Rather, there are a couple of topics that he wanted to talk about in the comedy. Okay, so this is a comedy of manners. Also, we have areas such as marriage, love, adultery, fortune hunting were also portrayed in these plays. They are also portrayed in the plays, but love is not like a love story in the romantic comedy, but love with associated with lust, or love associated with greed. Okay, so this is the difference. It's not all about love story, just I have already explained in romantic comedy. So the polite society has really disintegrated, and traditional values now seem redundant and foolish. So student, Common subject of this comedy of manners, there is lust, greed, materialistic, and there is marriage and love. But love and marriage, it does not come alone, rather it comes with a greed or lust, so it is associated. For this reason, it is called a comedy of manners, trying to correct the manners of, or let's say the morals of people.